Hello, learners. Today we will be reading about soil testing principles and methods. And what is soil testing? Soil testing is a chemical method of determining the nutrient supply and power of a soil. This is based on the preconception that sometimes some soils are deficient of some nutrients, or in some other extreme cases, they can have an extreme of some nutrients. For us to know how much a soil has or how much a soil lacks, we must do a soil test. The basic purpose of soil testing is ensuring that farmers have got better ways, economic ways of using fertilizers, that is, cheaper ways of using fertilizers, and better soil management practices. What we will be looking at in the next class are sustainable soil management practices. And the ultimate goal of whether you are using fertilizers or whether you are managing soils sustainably, the ultimate goal is to ensure that crop productivity is optimized. Usually, the result of a soil test is a fertilizer recommendation, and the fertilizer recommendation is based on the analysis results and interpretation from a soil test in comparison to prior knowledge on the agronomic research of a specific crop. What do I mean by that? A fertilizer recommendation is done after a soil test. That is, when you look at a given crop, for example, bean, how much of nutrients does a bean require for a given land in a certain area? If the soil has been tested, it should be found to be either having enough of the nutrients or inadequate nutrients, that is deficient of some nutrients, or in excess of some nutrients, based on previous data that shows that the specific crop that wants to be grown there requires this amount of nutrients. After that, we need to make a recommendation. Does this soil require addition of some nutrients? Does it require removal of some nutrients through soil conditioning? This is done through a soil test. Each of the recommendations in a soil test takes into account the results obtained from the soil analysis and previous research that has been conducted in agronomic studies or depending on a particular crop. Remember what we said when we were looking in previous classes, that a specific crop will require a specific amount of nutrients which is different from another. The solution for knowing how much is required for a particular crop is through a soil test. And you will notice that farmers do not even have the knowledge of knowing how much fertilizer they require of a crop to be optimally grown by just looking at it. There is difficulty. It is not easy to conclude that this soil lacks nitrogen or this soil lacks phosphorus by just looking at it. The solution is doing a soil test, knowing the exact amount of nutrients in the soil and comparing them with specific crop requirements of the target crop based on previous agronomic studies. Therefore, the solution to soil problems is soil testing. But what are the objectives of soil testing? Soil testing helps to evaluate the fertility status of a soil. It also predicts the probability of obtaining a profitable response after applying some soil conditioners such as gypsum, lime, and other fertilizers. It provides a basis for recommendations on the amount, the how much to add or how much to remove. It is also used to evaluate the fertility status of a soil to come up with what we call as a soil test summary. In large areas where soil tests have been done, a fertility recommendation can be done, like for instance in the whole region of Nairobi, we can say we only require the soils of Nairobi are deficient of nitrogen, therefore we only require to apply manure in the soils. This is a basic soil test summary. And at the farm scale, it can be used to develop small scale farmers to optimize their crop growth. But at large scale, it can be used to develop what we call as nutrient management programs. That is like a manual telling you that soils of a given region are deficient of nutrient ABCD. Therefore, for them to optimally produce beans, you have to apply nutrients ABCD. That is what we call a general nutrient management program. There are three approaches to do a soil test: observations in the field, on-site measurements, and laboratory measurements. Laboratory measurements require you to do a soil sampling, collect and transport the samples, package them, transport them, prepare them, and then extract and analyze them in the lab. And the on-site measurements, they do not require any disturbance on the soil and are mainly found when you're doing soil water analysis. Such examples include pH testing using a pH meter, the measurement of the color of soil, the measurement of the electrical conductivity of soils. It can be done using specific meters that can only require to be placed in the field without disturbing the natural appearance of soils. Observations in the field are based on physical appearance. In this case, you need to dig what we call as a soil pit that will depict the soil horizons in a soil profile. This is what I am referring to as a soil pit. It shows you how the various soil horizons are organized across the various different colors colors of the soil. They represent various horizons. The entire pit and the arrangement of the various horizons is what we refer to as a soil profile. The soil testing method. What are the steps you need to take when you're doing soil testing? Number one, you need to collect a representative soil sample. And in the next classes, we will discuss what is a representative sample and how it is collected. Number two, you need to determine the quantity of plant available nutrients in the soil sample. Basically, what we are referring to as soil testing or soil analysis. Number three, you need to interpret the soil test results. That is, you need to understand from the analysis results what is in excess and what is in deficiency, and how much should we add or how much should we remove through soil conditioning. Lastly, you need to estimate the quantity of nutrients required by the crop, what we are calling as a nutrient recommendation. That is, advice on what to add or what to remove based on the interpretation of the analyzed results from the collected sample. Soil sampling. Soil sampling is the most critical step in soil testing because it needs to be representative of a given field or sampling area. That is, it needs to give a general, real picture of the situation of soil, of the status of soil in a given area. A useful soil testing service usually starts with collecting a sample that is representative, and the sample must be taken at the right way, using the right way, and using at the right time, using the right tools in the targeted area at specific depths in the correct mixture, and all this information should be provided while doing the packaging of the resultant soils that are soil samples. But what is the right time to sample? Usually the right time to sample is before sowing, but for agricultural crops, the best time for sampling is when the crops are not in the field to avoid disturbance in the fields. For horticultural crops, the best time to sample is during autumn, that is just before the cold season. But as a general rule, a few weeks before planting or before seedbed preparation is when sampling should be done. In case of long-term or perennial crops such as fruit trees and foliage, The best time to sample is in the beginning of a flash of growth. This usually occurs in countries that experience spring, so that during spring, some of the trees that had shed their leaves, they begin to shoot again, and this is the correct time for sampling. The sampling units. In a field, you usually divide the sampling points into units, and these units are based on several factors. Usually, these factors include the visual observations on crop growth, the appearance of the soil, its color, the topography, previous management practices, soil management practices, or cropping patterns such as crop rotation, the various manuring patterns or fertilization approaches that have been used. The amount of sample to be sampled, how much of a sample should you require? Usually there is no restriction or specific guideline on how much you can take. However, the how much you take depends on the following factors: time constraints, topography, costs, and reasons for sampling. For example, if you want a soil sample for the 16 macronutrients and micronutrients, you would require a whole large sample of the soil. However, when you look at the cost, if your cost is limited, you would take a little of the soil, since the transport could also be hectic. When you look at the topography, in areas that are very steepy or have got wild animals, you would be hesitant to take a large sample of soil for your own safety. Other precautions you should take when doing soil sampling is that if the soils, once you dig a pit, are found in a very shallow water table, this must be noted, as it influences the resultant nutrients after an analysis as a result of leaching, elevation, and elevation. If you encounter a hard pan during digging of a pit between 150 centimeters from the surface, this depth and its thickness should be recorded because it influences the soil characteristics, the soil nutrient characteristics. Lastly, if you are sampling soils within a soil profile, you should start from the lowest horizon to the highest horizon. This is a precaution that ensures that the soils from various horizons of various depths do not mix with one another, and hence there is accurate results of the various nutrient contents at the various